Good morning. It's been a while. We all look younger, right? It's a real privilege to be here today. I want to thank Pastor Rob for the invitation. It's been a little over 14 years since I preached my last sermon year. And lots happened in those years, a lot of good things. I retired from Whitechapel Church after 10 years there in August of 2018. And I'm not really good at retirement. After 6 months, we joined an organization called TIPS. It's transitional pastors who go into churches and help them through the process of looking at some of the things they need to change and to get the church ready for the next pastor and to help find the next pastor. So our first assignment was in Monroe City, Indiana, and we were there for a year. And we left. It was interesting. That's about the time coronavirus hit. And so I preached online on a Sunday morning, preached online again on Monday morning, and left for Vero Beach, Florida at Pathway Church. We were there for 10 months. And then we were going to sell our condo, which we did, and moved back to Kentucky so Brenda could be close to her mom, who's at Liberty Ridge. And I thought, well, okay, that's it. We're going to retire. But we told God if there was something close enough that we would be willing to listen. So we ended up in Middletown, Ohio at Real Church for 9 months. We would leave on Saturday morning, stay till Thursday night, drive back to Kentucky so Brenda could see her mom, and leave again Saturday morning. We did that for 9 months. It's been an interesting little venture. It's Thanksgiving week, and we prepare to be with family and to overeat and do all those things you get to do at Thanksgiving time, and to think about all the blessings that we've received. But there's some things that we're not necessarily immediately thankful for, some things that happen in our lives that at first seem to be more of a problem than a blessing. But it's amazing in God's economy, He's even able to take the difficult things in our lives and turn them into blessings for ourselves and for others. And it's important that we remember that. It's been a difficult 3 years for churches. I've told Brenda I feel so, have such empathy for pastors today. With the coronavirus deal, all of a sudden, everything changed in the life of the church. And all people are watching online, and as a pastor, you don't know if they're here or not here. And it's very confusing at times. And the reality is, I believe, that attendance in church is probably never going to be exactly what it used to be because many people are choosing to stay home. I don't think that's necessarily a great idea, but that's what's happening. The life of the church is changing. And while that seems kind of sad and difficult, there's something positive in that. Because maybe God is saying to us, I want you to be the church I called you to be from the beginning. And, we've preached for years, the church is not a building. And yet everything we do is in this building, and most of the ministries that we do are at this place. And maybe God is saying, I've got something else in mind for my church. When we went to Vero Beach at Pathway Church, I arrived. They weren't meeting. It's this huge auditorium. And so for 10 weeks, I'm talking to the sound people, and that's kind of tough. But what amazed me about that church is it's a large church, and the staff, I didn't meet some of them for several weeks because we did Zoom meetings. Now, one of the staff I knew really well because he had always come in and helped me get on Zoom because I couldn't figure out how to do that, So, but this church, they had 250 people, elderly people in the congregation, and they had 70 volunteers who called them every week. I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing that they could do that. And then they had a group of people that would come on Thursdays to give food to the needy in the community. And during those 9 or 10 months that we were there, they led over a dozen people to Christ through that ministry. That's what it means to be the church outside the walls. Each year, we have graduations. A lot of churches celebrate the graduations of their high school kids and their college kids. Well, when we were at Daytona, we had a Christian school, so it seemed like we were having graduations for everything. You know, the 4-year-old graduation, that's a big deal. And there's like 90 kids graduating, and the 8th grade graduation, the high school graduation. But an interesting thing with graduations, not just in Daytona, across the country, everybody's looking for a gift to give a graduate, and the number one gift is a book. And you might be surprised at the number one book that is given for graduates, whether it's K4 or college or even post-college master's and doctorate degrees. I'm going to read you a few lines from the book and maybe you'll recognize it. Congratulations. Today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head and feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. And when things start to happen, don't worry, don't stew. Just go right along. You'll start happening too. Oh, the places you'll go. You'll be on your way up. You'll see great heights. You'll join the high flyers who soar to high heights. Except when you don't, because sometimes you won't. All alone, whether you like it or not, alone you will be quite a lot. Kid, you'll move mountains. So be your name Buxbaum or Bixby or Bray or Mordecai Al Van Allen O'Shea. You're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. Do you recognize the author? Dr. Seuss. Now, I confess I really like Dr. Seuss. The only problem is when you read him, you start wanting to talk that way, and it gets a little tough, you know. The post-coronavirus church is helping us rediscover what the church is really about. It's about a loving and caring community that genuinely help each other and bless each other. We can't stay in the church. We have to go out. We can't stay here. We have to go there. I can save you from taking notes this morning, if you do take notes, because basically this sermon can be summed up in a couple of words. Long ago, God called a man named Abram, later known as Abraham, to go. And the call came out of the blue, like God's calls often come to us. Congratulations, today's your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. And Abraham says, well, where am I going and how will I know when I get there? God's first command to us is to go. Go when I ask you to go. Go means that we have to leave our comfort zones. Go means that we sometimes don't have all of our questions answered. Wouldn't it be nice if God would explain to us exactly what's going on and exactly how it's going to work? Usually he just gives us enough information to take the next step of faith. Go means leaving the familiar for the unknown. And then God gives Abram a second command, and it's really one word: bless. So go bless. And these two imperatives totally change Abraham's world and eventually changes our lives. Listen to what he says in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you'll be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky for us, because usually when we think about blessings, we think about the blessings we've received, right? How God has blessed us, what God has done for us. And God says, I'm going to bless you, but the blessing's not for you. At least it's not for you to keep. It's for you to share. You are blessed so that you can be a blessing. Basically, he says to us, go bless. He repeats that promise in Genesis 28 when he says, all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. Well, what does it mean to bless? It means to add life, to add significance, to make life abundant. Basically, blessing is what God does. There's a Latin phrase that is pronounced mission day, and it means that it's the mission of God. Are you aware that God had a mission? That God had a purpose and a plan? It tells us in Genesis chapter 1 that he made the fish and the birds, and he blessed them. And then he goes down a little later in verse 28 and he says he created man in his own image and he blessed him. God is in the blessing business, and since we're made in the image of God, we also are in the blessing business. So what does it mean to follow God? It means to go and bless others. And you say, well, Pastor, I don't know how to bless. Nobody taught me. I didn't go to college to bless. I didn't understand exactly what it means to be a blessing. I don't have enough resources. Congratulations. Today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. To bless is your mission. And God has called us to go on mission. It's not just for the Mormons. It's for all of us. We're to go on mission for God. Now, most of you are at least a little bit familiar with Francis of Assisi. He was a Catholic saint and a very interesting guy. He was born around 1181 A.D. And one day, God spoke to Francis of Assisi these words. He said, Francis, all these things that you have loved in flesh, you must now despise. And from those things that you formerly loathed, you will drink great sweetness and immeasurable delight. Well, that's an interesting thing for God to say. And if he were like a lot of us, he would have written that in his journal and forgotten about it. Or he had taken some sermon notes and closed it up and forgot about it. But that's not what Francis of Assisi did. He went, and as he's leaving town, thinking about these words, he encounters the thing that he despised the most, a leper. Lepers were despicable to St. Francis. Most of us have trouble relating to the disease of leprosy because now it's a curable disease. Then it wasn't. And the best way to describe leprosy, probably for us that we can relate to, might be the coronavirus. Because with leprosy, there was an isolation that took place. Some of you experienced this when your loved ones go to the hospital with coronavirus. You couldn't go and see them. You couldn't be with them. I know that Brenda, when her mom was at Liberty Ridge and they were shut in, we would wave to her in her upper window. You know, it was very isolating. And the lepers of that day were isolated. In fact, they had to say, unclean, unclean, and people kept their social distance. They were the first social distancers. You know. Francis, before his conversion, never went near lepers. But on this particular day, after hearing from God that the things he used to loathe, he will find a blessing. He encounters a leper. He gets down off of his horse and goes over and kisses his diseased hand. And then he goes to a leper's village and kissed every one of them on their crusty lips. Francis' belief did not just inspire him, it transformed his life. Instead of running from the ugly and the fearful and the despised, he ran towards them and to them. Gary Thompson writes about the Christian church today. Modern Christianity, he says we've lost our sense of glory and the transformative power of God. We settle for a little tame religion, a few rituals, and maybe even an occasional miracle answer to prayer. Then he asks a rather important question. He says, is the Christianity taught today large enough to seize your heart? You see, the Christian life is supposed to be about drama and passion and struggle and vision, all those things that make us feel alive. Gary Thomas shares about an encounter he had with a 20-something, of which 80 to 90% are not in church and don't go to church. And he was talking to her about that, and this was her statement to Gary. She asked the question, why should I want to become a Christian? All they want me to do is dump the music from my iPod and wear ugly clothes. What would you say to her? Evidently, our preaching and our teaching has lost the vision of a glorious, transforming Christ who changes our lives completely. If following Jesus is only about avoiding something, we've missed the whole point. If a woman won't even empty her iPod to follow Christ, she certainly won't give her life to follow Christ. Incarnational faith is life transforming. It's not about rules. It's about a new heart. Why are we surprised that St. Francis of Assisi would say that we're made to be a blessing? And that's our ministry that we're to do. Ken Love is a state pastor in Florida, and Ken and I have been friends for a long time. And he's unusual as a state minister because he also has a congregation that he planted about 20 years ago in Orlando. And this congregation had been asking the question that we often ask, sometimes just theoretically without really any intention of changing. How do we reach people? What do we need to do to get outside our walls? Ken loves to go to Sonny's Barbecue. That's a big barbecue place in Florida. I think there's one here now. Okay, I have a testimony. Yes, there is one. It's good barbecue, by the way. And Ken loves barbecue. And as he's sitting there with his wife one day, his waitress that usually waited on him, he noticed she's pregnant, and he noticed she didn't have a wedding ring. And he started thinking, how can we bless her? Because that's what God was saying to him. I want you to bless her. And he thought, we could do a baby shower for her. And he's telling his life group about what he and his wife are planning, and it all of a sudden occurred to him, dummy, you're trying to get your church to go outside the walls. Tell them. And he told them, and they said, yeah, we'll go. And so they asked this girl, they said, we have a party of 12 that's coming on Thursday. Could you be our waitress? And she goes, well, I'm usually off on Thursdays, but he had already talked to her boss and told what they were going to do. And their boss says, yeah, you can work on Thursday. And so when she comes and they sit down and she looks at them, they said, this is going to be a baby shower. And he looked at the 12 people, she looked at the 12 people thinking, there ain't nobody pregnant in this group, It was not exactly a young crowd. And then they told her that it was for her. It was a baby shower for her. And the other waitresses came over because they wanted to see people who were willing to bless other people. Why should that be something unusual for a church? That we are a blessing to people. This church was a blessing to Brenda and I 30 years ago. Some of you who have been here a long time remember that Brenda went through a kind of a serious illness while she was teaching. And it was diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome, and at that time a lot of people didn't know what that was. We didn't know what that was. We just knew that she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even climb a flight of stairs. She couldn't drive a car for 3 years. And so it was a really difficult time, and it's just as Corey was getting ready to go to college, our oldest son. And suddenly we lost her income, and we're going, what are we going to do? There were 18 people that I don't know who you are in this church that for 12 months gave $100 a month to help us through that transition time of losing her salary. That was amazing to me. And probably, quite honestly, the reason we're still in ministries, because it was so hard. I didn't know how we were going to do it. The church was a blessing. You were a blessing. A few years ago, 2013 to be exact, the San Francisco Chronicle ran on its front page a story about a bus transit driver named Linda Wilson Allen. And Linda Wilson Allen had a bus route, and she had these regulars that always went on her route. And she knows their names, and she knows their families, and it's just like a little community. A woman in her 80s was sharing that Linda would get off the bus and help her carry her groceries onto the bus. So Ivy would skip other buses and wait for Linda to pick her up. And one day Linda was at the bus depot, and she noticed Tanya, and Tanya was by herself, and she realized she was kind of alone. And so she thought, I'll invite her to our house for Thanksgiving with my family. Who does that? So Tanya is now closest friends with Linda. Linda has built a little community that they call a community of blessing. And she's been offered vacations to people's vacation homes, and she's been given flowers and all kinds of little gifts, but that's not why she does it. Again, driving a bus is a thankless job with a lot of cranky people, with engine breaks down and lots of traffic. How does Linda keep this incredibly positive attitude and make this community? Again, this was on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. She said, I get up at 2:30 in the morning and I spend some time with God. I have a lot to tell the Lord at 2:30 in the morning before she goes to work. She's a member of the Haywood Glad Tidings Church. And when Linda gets to the end of her line of her drive, she always says, that's all. I love you. Take care. Where can you find the kingdom of God? On bus route number 45, riding through San Francisco. Where can you find the church? A lady sitting behind the wheel of that bus. Oh, the places you'll go. John Ortberg brought Linda in to interview her at his church, and John at that time pastored one of the wealthiest churches in Southern California. And as she came, he asked her, did she ever pray while she worked? And she said, yes, while I'm out there doing my job and ministering, I pray. What would the church look like if we were all out there praying and doing our job and ministering? 2014, I was at a Heart to Honduras meeting. I was on the Heart to Honduras board for probably 20 years. And I've taken many, many trips to Honduras. I've taken over 100 people from this church to Honduras. And I was at this meeting, and I've noticed over the years that a lot of North Americans go for these one-week missions trips, and they think, I want to go down to Honduras and live there and help. But it usually doesn't work out very well because we kind of want to go there and make the Hondurans like us. And that never works well. And most of them did not stay very long. 4 years ago, I met Caleb and Stacy, two young kids right out of college, and they were going to Honduras to teach the people about Jesus and to teach them about good cleanliness and about how to raise crops and to do some things to better their life. And I'm looking at these two kids, and he had red hair, and it's hot in Honduras in the summertime. I'm thinking, he's got this light complexion, and she looked like a softie, just sweet girl. I'm thinking, I'd give them 6 months, They moved to Honduras, not just to any place in Honduras, to this very remote village that was 30 miles from the nearest doctor, which really wasn't a doctor. And they went there, and instead of building a nicer home, they moved into one of the Honduran homes, an empty one. And Caleb began to put in a cistern to catch water. And the men in the village began to ask him why he was doing that. He goes, well, you can have clean water instead of walking 3 miles to get questionable water from the river. And they began to see what he was doing. And they began to teach the children, and the children started showing up at their home, and the moms came with them, and Stacy began to teach them about how to have nutritious meals. And Caleb taught them how to plant vegetables that would change their diet. They started going to the local little church there, and usually when an American would come there, they would be put in a place of prominence. They said, no, we're just here to pray for it and support the pastor. We're just members just like you. After 2 years, they had great progress, but Stacy got pregnant and they came home. And I saw them at the meeting with their 4-month-old daughter, Elida, who was just a beautiful little girl. And they were preparing the next Sunday to go back to Honduras to take their little baby to a village 30 miles from nowhere, in a place where health care was not easily available, a place where in the big cities it was dangerous. Caleb and Stacy are a blessing, and that's what followers of Jesus do. They felt like living among the people would be the best thing they could do to witness to them. And they came home last year after not 6 months in Honduras, but after a decade in Honduras. Jesus says, if you want to be great, you have to be a servant. We'll not be a great church if we're not great in the lives of the most vulnerable and hurting people that we know. For 20 years, the church in Monroe City, Indiana, which was our first TIPS assignment, have ministered to some of the poorest kids in the neighborhood. Monroe City is an interesting church. It's a church of over 400 people in a town of 500 people. Don't see that every day. And they have these huge wheat farms all around, and a lot of the people, one guy in the church raised 20,000 acres. I mean, it's unbelievable, the farming communities there. But there's a lot of really poor people. And on Wednesday nights, they would send out vans, and they would pick up these kids, 70 to 90 kids. And there were 20 people who served during that time at the church with those kids. Some of them had been doing it for 20 years. And so these kids would come, and it was the only church they knew. And the reputation of the church began to grow in the community. The school started asking them to send mentors for kids who were struggling. So every year they send 7 to 8 people into the schools to mentor kids that are struggling, and they tell them about Jesus. So when the coronavirus thing hit and they had to shut down services, their first concern is, what about the kids? That church, like many churches, wasn't ready for that. I remember the first few live stream services that I did, they shot it with an iPhone. That's how they live streamed it. It took a while to catch up. But their first concern was, what about these kids that are not going to get the school lunches that they need? And so they began to partner with other churches to help make sure those kids got their needs that they had. And they began to call the elderly people that needed concern. They were all asking the question, how can we be a blessing in this horrible situation? Let me ask you this morning, are you going when God says go? Are you a blessing? Are you seeking people far from God? Do you care about them? Do you have a heart for them? Are you asking God, use me to be a blessing? Is the faith we proclaim worth more than emptying the music from our iPod? Is it more than not swearing? We can't stay in. We have to go out. The church is not a building. It's not a group of superstars. The church are obedient followers who have simply fallen in love with Jesus. And sometimes it shows up in really simple ways. When we finished with the Pathway Church, we sold our condominium. We bought a house in Winchester, Kentucky, thinking that Brenda's mom was going to move in with us. I don't know what we were thinking. It's a 125-year-old house, and neither one of us know how to fix anything, which was not a good formula. But it had a first floor bedroom that we were going to move Esther into. We had the bathroom remodeled. And then Esther goes, well, I have to really pray about that. Brenda goes, Mom, you've already prayed. So anyway, she didn't leave Liberty. She loves Liberty Ridge, so she didn't leave. So now we get this big old house. And we haven't been there much. But we came after Pathway, we said, okay, we're going to be here with Esther. But we did say, God, if you have some place that's close enough, we'll go. And that turned out to be the Middletown Church. And so when we went to Middletown, it was really hard for me. I'm getting old and I can't remember everybody's name, because you keep changing churches every 9 months. And there's all these people, and the names all kind of run together. But there's one Sunday morning, I've been there maybe 4 weeks, this elderly guy comes down to the front of the church on a walker. And I didn't know his name, but I thought, well, I'm sure he wants to be prayed for his health. He looked like he was in rough shape. And I was partially right. He wanted to be prayed for healing, but not that kind of healing. He said, my name is Mike. My wife and I have been watching you online. I've never been to church, but I'd like to be saved. I think that's what you call it, And Mike prayed to receive Christ that Sunday morning, and his life changed. And it was so amazing to see what God was doing in his life over the next few months. And he told me he wanted to be baptized. That's a problem. Because like this church, you have steps you have to go up to get into the baptistry. The first 2 Sundays that Mike was there, he fell getting into his car. He was so unstable. I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to get this guy down into a baptistry? Up steps and then down into a baptistry. He's a big guy. And Bill, a guy in the church, was listening to me explain this problem to one of the staff, and he goes, Pastor, I got this. And he got another big guy, and the 2 of them helped Mike up the steps. One of them came down to the baptistry with me to help me keep him steady. Mike shared his testimony. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. 2 weeks after I left Brio, Mike had a stroke, and his health is very tenuous. But Mike knows Jesus because some people decided to be a blessing. And I thought about Bill. Bill's the custodian at that church. And he never complains when people don't clean stuff up the way they should or don't take care of things the way they should. He just wants to be a blessing. And he was so glad when he saw the look on Mike's face when he came out of the water from being baptized. He was the one that got the joy from that. You see, we must follow Jesus courageously, shamelessly, face death fearlessly, because one day Jesus is coming back, and we'll have the eternal privilege of living with a God who blesses every single day, because that's who he is. The heart of God is to bless. And the people of God, made in his image, are called to be a blessing. Oh, the places you'll go, the things that you'll see. So this morning, after 14 years away, I want to encourage you to go and to bless, because that's what he's called all of us to do. Would you pray with me? Oh God, don't let us stay here. When we think of all the men and women that you've blessed in this particular body of believers, many of them have blessed my life. We thank you for this church, but we know there's more that you want to do. Lord, help us not to keep this blessing to ourselves. We must bless others. We're here, but we can't stay here. We must go there. Would you allow a transformation of lives, a deliverance of broken souls and hearts through the people in this body we call the church? Could we really change the world, starting in this community, one heart at a time? Oh God, let it be true. Let it be so. We ask in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Ask that you would stand with us. What is it this morning that God is calling you? I would venture to say there's at least one person, if not many. You've heard what Pastor Steve has said this morning, and you know that there's something that God is calling you to do. While we sing this song, pray about that. And ask God what your next thing is that you're to go and do. Who are you to bless? I'll even say, if you would like for somebody to pray with you, the altars are open, or if you'd like to come to the front row. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you.
God, we live for you.
Thank you all for being here this morning. Go and remember to follow whatever God calls you to do. We love you.